Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Jashana here with my October Constant Classics wrap up, I guess. So I have been for a long time wanting to read more classics that I have not yet read, and I enjoy classics. It's just, you put it on the back burner. So this is the series that I started doing to basically kind of force myself to be held accountable to catch up on some classics. The classic I read for October is Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell, and this book is huge and heavy, so I am not holding it up for this whole video. I have seen the movie Gone with the Wind umpteen times, I don't know, just a bunch of times. I love it so much, and I had just never read the novel. I ended up giving the novel 3.75 Pushinicorns, and that's less than I thought I was gonna give it. But my reasons for 3.75, the positives are the sweeping, epic romance, and then just the theme of strength and perseverance, particularly in our main character Scarlett. Those are the positives that made me love it. The thing that knocked it down from being a 4.5, a solid 4.5, to a 3.75, and I even was leaning towards maybe a 3.5, 3.5, is the blatant, excessive racism use of the N-word, and just it felt it made me feel like Margaret Mitchell must have been a slavery apologist. So, yeah. Which is not great. So if you somehow haven't heard of this story and movie, our main character is Scarlett O'Hara, and she is this, southern lady on a plantation in Georgia. She's young at the beginning of the novel, and it starts off at the beginning of the Civil War. And then it's basically Scarlett's story through the next 10, 12 years or so. So speaking of Scarlett and her perseverance and strength, I was saying, that was my big thing for this book. Scarlett is vivacious to the max. She is the literal definition of extra, and giving zero fucks about, not zero fucks, she does give some, but generally speaking, she doesn't really care what other people think about her. She's who cares? At the beginning of the novel, she's young, she's 16 or 17, she's very flirtatious with anybody and everybody. She's slightly rebellious in the fact that she hates these what a genteel lady in the South is supposed to do, taking naps in the middle of the day when they're at a, local barbecue, or, nitpicking at food, eating like a little bird. And she argues these points when her Mammy and her mom are trying to tell her you need to be more of a lady, and she's the boys like it when I do this, I don't care. She is constantly pushing against these social norms that she's supposed to uphold as a lady. As you can imagine, based on that brief description, women don't really like her, the other women, especially women her age. Men love her, cannot get enough of her. She just knows exactly what to do to get men, specifically young, silly men, to fawn all over her and just be at her beck and call. And she is absolutely, without any question, selfish and just a brat. At the beginning of the novel, she meets Rhett Butler, and he's older, and he immediately sees her for who she is, and he has an attraction towards her for her personality. And she's pretty, whatever. But Scarlett is pretty much just pissy with him for calling her out on her shit, essentially, and it's not gentlemanly for him to speak so frankly with her. And while she does kind of go against the grain with certain societal norms, it's she knows what she's supposed to say. Very few other people see Scarlett past her flaws and appreciate her. Rhett does, and then the character of Melanie does. And Melanie, I'll get into that in a little bit. Melanie is one of the only people who truly cares for Scarlett. Melanie cares for everybody kind of, but she really cares for Scarlett. Despite her selfishness, her brattiness, cattiness, pettiness, immaturity, she's a flawed character. But despite all of that, I absolutely love Scarlett because of her perseverance and strength. There is literally nothing that can bring this girl down. Like, there's nothing that can break her. Just time and time again, like, she gets faced with all these terrible things, and everybody around her knows that, like, she'll be fine. As far as emotional strength and, like, mental fortitude goes, Scarlett O'Hara, for me personally, is one of the strongest characters I have ever read and encountered. Like, bar none. There's a quote by, I think it's Diane von Furstenberg. I don't know, she's like a designer. I don't know what this quote is about. I don't know anything about her, but I like the quote, or I don't know where the context of it came from. And she says, "I knew the kind of woman I wanted to be, so I became that woman." And I've always really liked that because I feel like that's what a lot of us do. That's what most people do, right? You see other people, the examples, the role models in your life, right? And whether it be an actual person or fictional characters or whatever, you pick up the qualities that you like about them and you try to, like, instill that within yourself, right? That's how I feel like I have been. I've picked up a lot of things from my mother because I adore my mother. But then I think there's been fictional characters that I've picked up things from. And I really, truly think, even though I hadn't read the book before, like I said, I'd seen the movie a bunch of times, her character's pretty much the same in the book and the movie. And I think I picked up, like, wanting to have that much strength from Scarlett. Like, I saw that and I was just, like, so impressed by it. I just really admire that no nonsense and, like, nothing is gonna break me down. I will figure this shit out mentality. Now on to the sweeping epic romance that is this novel. So Scarlett is infatuated, in love with whatever her neighbor, Ashley Wilkes. She's always, not always, but for a few years before the start of the novel, she has been, like, in love with him. But she has all these beaux, you know, he doesn't think she's paying any special attention to him, and he doesn't necessarily pay any special attention to her, but in his family, they always marry their first cousin, so he marries his first cousin, Melanie, and they love each other, whatever. Scarlett's all pissed. So Scarlett, like, hates Melanie through the whole novel. Like, she just can't stand Melanie. Melanie is the complete opposite of Scarlett. Like, complete opposite. And I remember watching the movie and thinking this too, that, like, I never understood Scarlett loving Ashley because he's just like a sap. And not in the way that the people in the novel describe him. They say he's, like, not manly enough because he likes to read and he's more intellectual and, like, deep thinking. That's not why I don't like him. That's whatever. He just is one of these characters, one of these people that, like, life just happens to him. Like, he just doesn't seem to have very much strength of character. Life is happening to him and he's just letting it happen to him and not doing anything about it. He's just, like, floating through life. And, like, again, he's so different from Scarlett, and it's like, why would she ever have thought that would be a good match? I don't know. But Scarlett is basically just too dense and too self-centered to really, like, take a step back and look at who Ashley is and who they would be together, and if they ever could be together, which they can't because he's married. Like, just to see whether or not they'd be a good match. She doesn't take the time to, like, think about that. And the same with Rhett. Because if she did, she would see that Ashley is not the dude for her, and that Rhett is literally the perfect man for her. He knows who she is. It's not based on fantasy like her love for Ashley is. Her love for Ashley, by the end of the novel, she realizes, like, I just painted this picture of this person and I was in love with that. I wasn't really in love with him. I was just in love with this idea of him, basically. And Rhett's love for Scarlett is not that. It is definitely based on who she genuinely is and him knowing that they would be perfect together if they could just get together and be on the same page. And by the end, it's tragic and it's upsetting because this whole freaking book, you're like, just be with Rhett, just be with Rhett. Come on, just be with Rhett. He loves you. You love him. Like, it's obvious. And then finally they do get together. Like, she begrudgingly basically marries him for his money. And even while they're married, they have a kid. Like, she enjoys him, but she still doesn't realize that she loves him. So the ending is so tragic and depressing because he's leaving her. And she's, like, in love with him finally. Like, finally realizes it. And you're just like, ah! But I also love the ending because it's so quintessentially Scarlett. She realizes that he's gone, that he doesn't give a damn anymore. And she is like, well, I've never not been able to get a man. If I set my mind to it, I can get him back. I know I can. And it literally ends with her saying, tomorrow is another day. And like, if that isn't Scarlet in one sentence, I don't know what is. So while the ending is depressing and like, tragic, I also loved it because it's just her. Like, that's who she is. Nothing can break this chick, like, at all. So then, the negative. I understand that this book was written in the 1930s and that the setting is the Civil War, the mid-1860s and on. And while I'm sure it was accurate for the time and the setting, the excessive use of the N-word just was difficult to read a lot of the time. Like, I wasn't like mad at the book for having it, because again, I understand that it's accurate for the time, but it's still just like, ugh, God. Because it's just used so casually. Like, and it's just like, oh, geez. Like I said, the last half started to make me think, like, was Margaret Mitchell a slavery apologist? Because it seemed like she was, like, justifying it and, like, saying it wasn't that bad. Like, stating over and over again through the lens of different characters, not just, like, one character, like, all the characters, including some of the slaves, saying that slavery is needed because Black people are, like, less intelligent and they're like feeble-minded and, they need their master to care for them. Like, a white man's job is to be the head of the household and make sure his women and his slaves are like okay in the world. Because without him, oh God, who knows what would happen to them. And it's like, ugh. And again, even the slaves in Scarlet's world, Mammy, Prissy, Pork, everybody, Uncle Peter, they were like slavery apologists too. And I got interested in this, and so I Googled trying to find out like if Margaret Mitchell really felt this way, because it was also how women were talked about too. Like I said, women were kind of lumped in this, they need to be protected, women shouldn't do this, women shouldn't do that. But the way that she talked about women seemed to be saying, like, to me, the way it came across in the writing was saying, look at how silly these people were in this time and how they thought about women. Like, isn't that ridiculous? That's how it came across when she was talking about women. Because then we have Scarlet, who's the clear, like, representation of a beacon of hope for women. Scarlet is very much, like, she shouldn't be in this time period. Like, she's a character from, like, the 1930s plopped into the 1860s. And she is kind of the example we are constantly given of like, this is how women can be and should be, and how everybody else thinks is like silly and ridiculous. Whereas with the slaves, it didn't feel like she was saying this is silly and ridiculous. And all of the freed slaves that were, not still with their families, with their masters, were portrayed as ignorant, drunk, violent brutes that were just trying to rape all the white women. And then all of the slaves in Scarlet's world, all the Black people who, once they were freed, they just kept working for their families and their masters. And while they had their freedom, they just wanted to stay in their comfortable world. They were, like, constantly, they were mad at the Yankees, too, for, like, poking their nose in the Southern people's business and, like, leave us alone. This is our way of life. It's fine. And, again, portrayed as, like, needing the white man to, like, protect them and care for them. And when I Googled, all I really found was an article that was talking about how a little bit later in her life, I mean, she was young when she died, but that Margaret Mitchell donated money to, I can't remember the college, but a Southern college, and she donated money for the education of young Black men. And then she had like a maid that like worked for her or something that was Black, and she got sick. I don't know if she got cancer. She got sick at one point, and Margaret Mitchell saw the hassle it was to get her adequate medical care. And so then she took up that cause and like was donating money to that cause of like medical care for Black people. And the article was basically raising the question of like, well, we don't know if she did this because she always felt this way and because she always felt that this was important, or if it was kind of like a guilty conscience of like her previous way of thinking. You know what I mean? So I don't know about that, but it was interesting anyway. And then the next thing is that the fucking Ku Klux Klan was like glorified and like downplayed as just like this political party of these like underdog white Southern men that just wanted their way of life back. That's all. That's all, guys. They just want their way of life back. It's okay. But yeah, it just like the whole thing was just like a sob story for the South and how their whole lifestyle got turned upside down. Oh, these poor people, these darn Yankees just came down here and threw everything into a tumult. And it just, reading those sections talking about like how they were just upset that their way of life was getting taken away and their fear of the freed slaves like further taking away their way of life, it just rang way too close to home for our current situation and a lot of people's current mindset of their fear of their way of life being taken. Oh, the American way of life is dying, blah, blah, blah. I was reading and I was just like, oh God, this could be written now. If it wasn't for all of that, I would have probably rated it a 4.5. Because it's a 960-some page book that kept my interest. So for a book of that magnitude, without like epic fantasy elements to keep my interest, it's pretty impressive. And I probably would have rated it higher, but yeah, the whole general, poor Southern white people and their way of life, and like slavery isn't that bad, it's fine, because their slaves weren't miserable, as Ashley said at one point. Like, fuck off with that shit. This is probably going to be really long, and I'm going to have to do a lot of editing. I had a lot to say. It's a long book, okay? Okay, that is all. For next month, I have decided to read Jane Eyre. Thank you so much for your time, guys. Let me know below if you've read Gone with the Wind, if you loved it, if you hated it, if you were able to see past the blatant racism and slavery apologist themes. Thank you so much for your time, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.